Okay, now we're going to talk a little while about Islam. Um, the role of man, humanity, in Islam is the role of being Allah's tool in the world, God's tool in the world. Um, a lot of people, at least I've been taught, let's just say this, I've been taught that Islam was essentially determinist tradition. It's not. It is a position where, uh, as in so many uh, religious traditions, I don't know of any non-religious traditions, but we can see it in the Protestant writer Kierkegaard. We see it in the Catholic writer St. Augustine. Um, the only good act of a will is submission to the divine will. That's all you need. If you have properly submitted to the divine, then you will always be good, and you will always be right, and you will always be true. The world that Allah has made, uh, the creatures above us, the angels, the divine, they can't carry out the plan in the world. The reasoning's actually presented that there would be no people at all if all was needed was God. So what we have covered here is a way to explain why the divinity creates humanity, which coincidentally in most Christian, well, there isn't any evidence presented as to why. No suggestion, no argument, nothing in the religious books of Judaism or Christianity. They have traditions, but if you go back and read, there's no particular reason why that God creates human beings. Why he didn't stop with everything except human beings. It's a complete mystery in those traditions. In Islam, there is a world, there is a fully realized morality about the world that only human beings, as the divine tool, can realize. And everyone else, all other creatures on the planet, all other creatures of infinity, all of the other things in the universe, which brings us to the divine, cannot realize the divine plan the way humanity can. And therefore, that's why we are created, to realize the divine plan. This, again, creates a completely different view of the world. We are not then encouraged to be assertive. We are not encouraged to be competitive. Our goal here is merely to discover the divine will and realize it to the best of our ability. Thus, we emphasize learning. We do emphasize discovery in terms of the world and what it has to offer, because it's through understanding the world that we can best realize the divine will. Historically, that's always been the Islamic position. The great universities of Europe are all imitations of the universities of Islam, because the learning was thought to be necessary to completely submit to the will of Allah. Before that, in the West, you had perhaps an interesting teacher here and an interesting teacher there, but you had no assemblage of teachers, except, of course, at Alexandria, the great library. But that was unusual. That's part of the reason why its destruction was so significant and so important. Of course, we're generally given, well, one of the stories anyway, we're given of the destruction of the library at Alexandria is by a Muslim ruler who is supposed to have said, if it is true, it's already in the Quran. And if it's not already in the Quran, then it's false and there's no point in having it. It sounds an awful lot like, I've heard the same thing told about some Christian pope or another. And of course, Julius Caesar's also supposed to have been given that line. But what you do find here in this version of humanity is that the great virtue is not so much self-realization as it is divine realization, that the goal of the human is to submit to divine will, not to go around trying to figure things out for yourself, but to discover what God's plan is and behave accordingly. You hear this talk a lot in a lot of Christian traditions as well, but not since the Enlightenment. Our next reading, have Westerners been really committed to that plan. It's just a completely submissive worldview that sees a place in it for every person. It's already organized. It isn't a matter of your free choices. It's a matter of your discovering how best to serve the divine. Here we go. Let's come back here. 391 in the text. Ismail Ragi al-Faruqi says that the ideal man leads the felicitous life of the universal brotherhood under the moral law, to whose fate, his fate, is inextricably attached. So here, what is what I'm saying? You are what you should be under the moral law. That is your goal, is to find your place and follow it. Not as a passive object of history, but rather as history's active subject, as the second master of creation. So again, you're not looking to create a world where nobody learns, nobody grows, nobody changes. You're simply aware that you must fit into this present life for evolving and procuring the end goal for Allah, whereupon we were told, rather, man was so endowed and perfected that he may live an eternal life, a life in which each receives the rewards of his deeds. And thus, again, we are fitting into the divine plan. Our success and our failure in fitting into the divine plan and finding out what is expected of us, insofar as we do that, insofar will we receive that a good reward or bad reward in eternity. There's a nice little ranking of the orders of the soul, and the first three levels are the levels we'd have seen in Plato: the vegetative, the animal, and then the rational. But on top of that, Ishmael provides us with a law-pursuing soul. Thus, it is our it is not merely enough. Well, let's put it this way: our reason should be enslaved by the law. Now, we're going to see that again in just a minute in Immanuel Kant, who says basically the same thing, that we have a public freedom, that is, we're free to express ourselves in a public in the public environment, but a private, in private we must obey, and wait for the details on that. But basically what Kant's trying to suggest is that there are laws that we must all follow. If we follow those laws, all will be right. So there are times when real freedom is submitting to the law. And that, of course, as I say, is what we see in Islam. Real freedom is giving over your freedom to the divine, to the eternal. Thus, uh, we're not to be looked at again, one, as being without place or plan in the universe. Our life has meaning precisely as the tool of Allah. Uh, Completely different than what we saw in Mencius, completely different from what we'll see as we go forward. Harmonious, yes, but different. And never confuse harmony with equality. The two things fit together doesn't mean they're the same thing. Uh, the great traditions of Islam, and going back a couple, well, almost 1,000 years now, was everybody gets along, providing nobody stirs the pot. You understand that the only real, remember we talked about this in our little discussion of ethics in political theory in Islam. You have to understand that only the believers can really rule. Everyone else is welcome to be here, but they have to understand they're subservient because they're wrong. You only partly understand the will of the divine, so you can't generally pursue it, blah, blah, blah. So we have this here that uh, as you succeed or fail in finding your place, you will succeed or fail in serving the divine. As you succeed or fail in serving the divine, you will be rewarded or punished eternally. Um, all right. I think that's what I want you to carry away from this. It's a sense of community. I mean, take a look at the 5 pillars: prayer. I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head now. Prayer, um, alms, charity, um, spreading the wealth. Now, bear that in mind. That's spreading the wealth. Um, we have fasting. We have the Hajj, and the one I'm not remembering is here in the book, so I'll look it up. Pillar I'm missing is confession. Oh yeah, all right. I'm so sorry. That's one I should not have forget. I used to even know it in Arabic, but it is, that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Uh, so these pillars give you the direction. If you will listen to these pillars, if you will follow these pillars, they will lead you to the will of God, which will lead you to a meaningful place in the universe. And that then is your goal as a human being, is to become submissive to the divine will.